Okay, so this is a little mini domain and range lesson. Domain is going to be your x coordinates. And for domain, you're going to go from the furthest left-hand point to the furthest right-hand point on your graph. So you're always going to follow your graph. And if you go to the furthest left-hand point, that's going to be, there's a point, a dot on there. And then if I follow my graph down, my furthest right-hand point has an arrow on it. That arrow really looks like it's going straight down. I'm going to interpret that arrow as going straight down. It's not going off to the right at all. It is going straight down. So this graph is going to keep going, zooming down, straight down. It's never going to hit -5. It's going to get close to it, but it's never going to totally hit it. So for my domain, my furthest left-hand point is going to be -5. My furthest right-hand point is going to be 5. So as an inequality, I would write that as -5 is less than or equal to, because there is a point there, x, is less than 5, because this graph is shooting down to 5 at 5, but it's never actually going to touch it. As interval notation, the other way to write this, which you're going to learn in your math class, is you use a bracket at -5, and then you use 5 with a parentheses. The bracket means we're including it. The parentheses means we're not including it. Okay? Domain goes from left to right. Two ways to write it. This way of writing it is called an inequality method. And this way of writing it, if Pearson asks you, is called interval notation. And interval notation is kind of an easier way to write it, but it's brand new to you this chapter. It can look a little bit like an ordered pair. When you're using interval notation, you want to be very clear that, oh, this is interval notation, so that's why it looks like an ordered pair, but it's not. All right. Range is going to be the y-coordinates. For the y-coordinates, we're going to go from the bottom to the top. So the bottom point of my graph is right here, and it's got an arrow pointing down. So since the arrow is pointing down, the y-coordinate, the bottom y-coordinate is going to be -infinity. This arrow continues shooting down forever to -infinity. Then I follow my graph all the way up to the top point. The top point has a dot on it, and it's at -5. No, it's not. It's a y-coordinate. +5. We're looking at the y-coordinate. The top coordinate is 5. Okay, in inequality notation, that would be -infinity is less than y is less than or equal to 5. The reason we don't use an equal to sign on infinity is because you can't really be infinity. So it's just an idea of a really, really small number. So we put a less than sign on it. Now, if I translate that to interval notation, I start with a parentheses because the infinity is not included. So I'm going to start with -infinity, comma, and the highest value is 5. So I put a 5 with a bracket because the 5 is included. Right? So we're going to try this a little bit more. Domain and range for this graph. I would recommend you pause and try it yourself. We're going to practice both inequality notation and interval notation. Right? So for domain, the furthest left-hand point of my graph is at -3. I follow my graph the whole way until I get to the furthest right-hand point. That point is at 1. So if I want to write this as an inequality, I would write -3, and then it looks like we're not including -3. That looks like an open circle. So we're not going to include -3. And then the furthest right-hand point has a closed-in circle, so we are going to include that. So we'll put a bracket, a less than or equal to sign. This is inequality notation. And then we're going to do interval notation. So we're going to start with the -3, comma, 1. We use a bracket on the 1 because that is included, and we use a parentheses on the -3 because that's not included. This is interval notation. Okay, now we're going to switch to range. So for range, we're going to put our pen on the lowest point. It looks like there's a tie. These 2 points are both lowest, but it's okay. They have the same y coordinate. So my lowest point has a y coordinate of -4. It's a tie. There are 2 different points there, but that's okay. They have the same y coordinate. Okay. My highest point has a y coordinate of 0, and this one's not included, but this one is included, so that one's a little bit higher because it includes it. So my range is going to be -4 is included because there's a point there, and 0 is included because there's a point here, even though there isn't one at the other end, at the other place. So then for my brackets, I'm going to do -4 and 0, and I'm going to use square brackets on both of those because both of them are included. Okay, this is the inequality notation, and this is the interval notation. We can also do this with parabolas. So domain, furthest left. Oh, that has an arrow on it and it's pointing off to the side. So my furthest left is going to be -infinity because it's going off to the side. Follow the graph to the furthest right. Oh, that is going +infinity. So my domain in inequality notation, what Pearson says for domain when it's like this is it says all real numbers. Some books write -infinity is less than x is less than infinity. And then in interval notation, you would say -infinity, comma, infinity with parentheses on both ends because you can't really be infinity. Okay. Now we're going to do range. Range is low to high. So here's the lowest point on my graph. That has a value of -3. And then highest points is a tie, but they both have arrows on them. So that's going to be infinity. And so in interval notation, Pearson does -3 is less than or equal to at y, because we're given range. And Pearson does not include the infinity. Some books do. So this is what Pearson would write. And then in interval notation, you do a bracket on the -3, and then you do infinity with a parentheses. All right, we're going to do one more. Domain, furthest left-hand point has an arrow. Furthest right-hand point also has an arrow continuing to the right. So my domain is either all real numbers, or in interval notation, it would be from -infinity to infinity. Range, the lowest point isn't really a point, but it's getting very, very close to 0, but it's not including 0, it's just getting really close to it. And then that highest point is shooting up to infinity. So in inequality notation, it would be 0 is less than y, and you don't include 0 because it doesn't actually hit 0. And in interval notation, it would be from 0 to infinity, and we don't put any brackets on either end because we don't really include 0.